start the meeting, I need to read the statement. It's, please can I remind all participants that this meeting will be recorded and copy archived for future viewing. And could all participants mute themselves when not speaking, and then this will avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. And if you do wish to speak, can you please put your hand up? There's a raise your hand function, or there's the chat function. But if you can do that, and between myself and the Democratic officers, we should be able to pick everybody up then. But if we do miss somebody, just bear with us, we will come to you. So if anybody has any difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, can you please let myself or the Democratic officer know? And if you have a webcam, then try turning that off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so at least you can hear and then be heard. So it all depends. I mean, hopefully we should be quite straightforward tonight. So I'd like to welcome all committee members, cabinet members, our officers, and also we do have a few public speakers as well tonight to do in relation to the report, our flooding event on the 23rd of December. So what I'm going to do, we'll go through the first three items, and then I'm just going to briefly run through how we're going to conduct that the reference from Cabinet and how we're going to present that. So I'll go to item 1 to start with, which are apologies for absence. I understand Councillor William may have to dip in and out of the meeting. He's got another commitment at the moment, and also Councillor Robertson, I know, is intending to join us as and when he can, so he may well be running late. Is there any other apologies?
None for Democratic, thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on to item number 3 then, which is to receive declarations of interest, which include whipping declarations under the Council's Code of Conduct. So do we have any? No? Lovely. Okay. Right, we've only got one item on the agenda this evening, which if it had been a small item, we may have...
Sorry, Chair, sorry to interject. Can we see if the previous minutes are okay to be cleared?
That would help, wouldn't it? Sorry about that. So back to item number 2, which I missed out completely, which are the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of January 2021. Are we happy to agree those minutes?
To agree.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Gareth. Right, so moving on then to item number 4, which I said we've got this this one item on the agenda this evening, which if it had been a smaller item or a bit of a run-of-the-mill item, we may have deferred to the next meeting. But I think in light of the whole situation around flooding and the event that did happen before Christmas, I thought it was more prudent to actually hold this meeting this evening and obviously invite speakers along, which we have got some public speakers, and have our discussion around it then. So how we're going to run this, because I've actually got 3 speakers. I'd like to welcome the speakers. We've got Mrs. Wendy Gilligan, Dr. Max Wallace and Ruth Brennan. So I'd like to welcome you to the meeting. I understand you've been advised how you're going to be called in and let into the meeting as and when it's your turn to speak. So initially, we've got Miles Punter's actually going to present the report to us. And then I'm going to bring the public speakers in, and I'll bring them in the order I've got them on my sheet, which is Wendy Gilligan is the first speaker. Then we will seek if there's any point of clarifications from committee members on anything that you said, Ms. Gilligan. Then I'm going to bring in Dr. Max Wallace, and then exactly the same thing is if there's any points of clarification needed by committee members, we'll ask those. Then the third speaker, which is Ruth Brennan, and same thing then is points of clarification from committee members. So I'll ask that after each speaker. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes. It will be timed, and we do need to stick to those times very, very strictly. So we will be timed, and then we will advise you then when your time is up. And I would be grateful if you would respect that time as well. Then I'm going to bring in Councillor Bob Penrose, has asked to speak at the committee tonight. He's not a member of the committee, but he has asked if he can come along and speak. So Councillor Penrose will have up to 5 minutes, which is in line with the constitution of our council. And again, we'll ask if there's any points of clarification from committee members. So when we've had those, then I'm going to ask Miles then to respond to all those points raised from our 3 speakers and Councillor Penrose. Then I'm going to ask if there's any cabinet members here, if they would like to respond to any of the points raised by the speakers and by Bob Penrose, if they so wish. And then we'll open it up then for general discussion and debate and questions from committee members. So I hope that's quite clear. And in which case, I don't know if you haven't any more questions, then I'll bring Miles in if you wanted to start with the reference, which has come from Cabinet. So if you'd like to start us on the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Clear enough? Yeah, okay. So this evening I'm going to talk about a reference to Cabinet, from Cabinet of the 8th of February, and it concerns the flooding event in December 2020. Before I take you through the salient points of the report, can I just offer my deepest sympathies to those that were flooded. I know we have a couple of residents here today who were flooded. It's a devastating experience. I've not been flooded myself, but I've been involved with flood risk management since 2020, year 2000, sorry. And to give the residents and members some confidence in my dealing with this matter, I was involved in 2007 in the serious floods at that time, and I've been responsible for installing 2 significant flood risk management schemes since then. One in the Cobrook at a cost of £10 million and one in Boverton at a cost of £4.5 million, which have reduced the flood risks in those areas. So it is something I know quite a lot about. But firstly, I wanted to make sure that those who were affected know that the council's thoughts are with them, particularly at the time of year that the flooding event occurred. So in terms of the report, it's fair to say that it was an initial report. Things have moved on since we took the report. And essentially, it looked to deal with a number of issues. Firstly, the council's response and position at that time, the council's legal duties in such incidents, and what we plan to do. I think it's fair to say that there is some misunderstanding in terms of what our actual role is in flooding emergencies, and I will try and explain what that actually is as we go through. So clearly, some residents thought that our role was greater than it actually is, and that's something we need to address as we go through. So the event itself, and the report says 33 millimetres of rain in 11 hours, not massive. I think the issue with this was that the time it fell, the rivers were very high, and we'd had quite a long period of wet weather, so the ground was fairly saturated, so runoff was significant. The report indicates in paragraph 2.12 that more than 100 properties were flooded, mainly in the Dinas Powys and Sully areas. We had flooding right across the Vale, but primarily it was Dinas Powys and Sully. So we sent out 800 questionnaires to the areas concerned, and from a combination of return questionnaires and the hardship claim forms that we've had returned to date, we've now recorded 102 properties internally flooded. 95 of these are residential, 7 are commercial, and 69 of these are in Dinas Powys, and 2 of the 69 in Dinas are commercial. And we expect the final figure for residential properties to be in the region of 120 and approximately 20 commercial, so a significant event. And to put that in perspective, the event in 2007, which was very significant for us, involved 100 properties and a number of schools. So it's right up there for us with the size of that event in 2007. Some of the things that we did at the time are detailed within the report. We provided, it says 1,300 sandbags, but it was actually 1,500 sandbags we provided, 64 skips to help clean up the flood damaged household goods. And then paragraph 1.5 advises of the council's legal duties under the Flood and Water Management Act. As I said before, it should be remembered that we're not an emergency service in such incidents. The emergency response for flooding incidents lies with the Fire and Rescue Service. and they would look after life and personal injury. So our main role as an authority is to review what's happened in terms of flood risk and to produce a report, an investigatory report under Section 19 of the Flood and Water Management Act. So that's detailed within the report under paragraphs 2.13, 2.14 and 2.15. Essentially, we've started these reports. We've engaged consultants, JBA. It was important for us to bring in independent consultants to do this because we have a role in it. So we wanted to make sure that the actual outcome of the process was fair. It involves ourselves, it involves NRW, and it involves Welsh Water. And we're committed currently to provide those reports to Welsh Government by March the 31st. And the reports will be open to the public. I don't have all the answers today because a lot of the information is coming from the questionnaires we've handed out, and other information is coming from the technical expertise of the consultants. I'll answer what I can and what I know to date, but the reports will be publicly available and they will be discussed by this committee. The idea of the reports is to establish how to mitigate risks in the future. In some cases, that's not easy to do, and if we get a flood risk management grant for any works, Welsh Government will use a cost-benefit analysis process to establish whether the funding should be spent in those areas or not. It's not always something that there is a solution for. Sometimes the solution lies within the community itself, but this is what this report does. It looks at all the aspects and looks at how we can actually mitigate measures in the future. Just a brief update then as to what's happened since the report. So I sent out letters personally to all town and community councils to see if they wish to take part in holding sandbags for us for their specific areas, because one of the problems that was clear on the day was that if you're in the middle of a flood, you've hardly got the time to drive to Barry if it's not your local area to pick up sandbags. That clearly didn't work. So I wrote to all town and community councils asking them if they wish to hold them for us and to administer them. So far to date, Slam Mace have taken some. They took some previously for risk scheme that we're looking to do in that area. We gave some to Sully, and Councillor Penrose, Councillor Manny took charge of those, and some to Dinas Powys. So disappointingly, I didn't have many responses from town and community councils, but I will chase that up. But one of the ways I think we can improve our response is by putting the measure of sandbags closer to the community. So that's something I'm looking to do as we go forward. We had the Welsh Government hardship grant come through on the 4th of February. So and what that means is if your internal principal living space has been flooded, then you are eligible to a grant of either £500 or £1,000, depending on whether you've got flooding insurance or not. So far to date, since the 4th of February, we've processed 42 claims for payment, and we've paid out £24,500. We've set up a dedicated phone line and an email address. What we'll do, because not everyone's got access to the web, and maybe some people are not able to contact us by telephone, is when we've got the initial tranche in, so say another 2 weeks from now, we'll do a check, knocking door to door for those that haven't yet responded, because they could be maybe some elderly people perhaps who have not picked up the messages. So we'll make sure we mop all that up, and we'll use the community council to help us with that. So we're hoping that everyone who had their principal living space flooded will be will actually apply for this grant. It's Welsh Government funded money. But we can actually, if we spend more than 30,000, which we will have already, on ourselves and putting out money to the communities, we can claim that back. I've met with local ward members in both the main areas. So I met with Dinas Powys members and I met with Sully members on more than one occasion. I've also met with the businesses affected in Sully. Myself and Councillor King have met with ministers. We've met with the Environment Minister. We've met with her twice, and I met with her once. And we've also met with Jane Hutt. And the purpose of those meetings is to lever money from Welsh Government, essentially. And I have to say, so far, the response from Welsh Government has been promising. So we'll continue with those meetings. We've updated the website. We're working on our emergency phone lines, because if you phone us after a certain time, there's only five lines it'll take. So if you're number 6 in the queue, you won't get through. And the least we can provide to people who are flooded is information. And we're working on that so that we get a better phone line situation for when your phone is out of hours. We've engaged consultants, as I said, with a March 31st completion. We committed to working with the National Flood Forum in Dinas Powys to improve community resilience, and we will take an active role in that. It's being led by NRW. And we put additional resources into gully emptying, which is something that I know the speakers will raise this evening because it's a concern for them. And we are reviewing the whole arrangement for gully emptying in those areas that have suffered flooding. Because as it stands currently, we have a 15 to 20 week cleaning schedule throughout the Vale, regardless of the type of area that's concerned. So that's it in a nutshell, Chair, for now. I know there's plenty of questions to come, but I think that details the report and brings you up to date.
Okay, thank you, Miles. I mean, you know, it's very clear how serious this situation was. I can remember the 2007 flood as well, and it leaves that fear, I think, within the communities as well for a long time afterwards. And even now, because part of it was in my ward, and in other parts of the town as well, and you still remember that then. So yeah, you know, people's worries or are justifiably worried, and it's good that we can actually raise our concerns. And I'm also pleased to see that this is not the final report. This is actually a first report, because this is a developing situation, and the more information we can gather and the more responses, official responses and professional responses, will help. Obviously, it'll help our officers set the agenda around flooding, and also obviously for residents as well. So thank you for that. So I'm going to bring in the first speaker, which is Mrs. Wendy Gilligan. So Wendy, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Great.
I don't know whether you can see me or whatever. Okay.
Yes, so you've got 3 minutes to speak, or up to 3 minutes. There will be time, so don't worry about timing yourself. Our officers will let you know when your time is up.
I'm sure they will.
And then also if there's any point of clarification committee members require, we can ask those then after that. Okay, so it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the residents in Dinas Powys who were affected by the flooding of their properties and vehicles on the 23rd of December 2020. The residents are very angry, upset on why this came about, and do not believe that it was surely due to the high volume of rain that we had on the day, but a combination of other factors as well. Drains not maintained and cleaned, riverbeds through the village not maintained and cleaned and not dredged. And we have photos as a community and a flood resistant group to prove this. What has happened is now in the past, but we do not want to have to go through this again. I am grateful that the National Flood Forum is now coming to Dinas Powys to help residents. However, what I want to know is what you as a council are going to do, short, medium, long term, to help. You have a duty of care to the residents in Dinas Powys. I'm afraid if you do not deliver and help us, you should not be representing the residents who elected you onto the council. We are still living with this nightmare 7 weeks after the flooding, and I'm guessing my property will not be back to pre-flood condition until May. I'm still living at home, but it's like a building site. Others are not so lucky and had to find other accommodation. This is having a huge effect on people's mental health and well-being during this and the pandemic. We have had 3 flood warnings since, and living with the fear that it's going to happen again with very little work done by yourselves. Why? Where were you after the devastation? Could you not come and visit and see the devastation? Personally, I do not think as a council this was good enough, and you should be ashamed. When looking at National Resources Wales Dinas Powys Risk Management Scheme outline business case dated the 4th of May 2020, there was actions tabled in that report to work together to put things in place with yourselves. Has this work been started? If not, why? Over 100 properties were flooded, and the forecast from National Resources Wales is that potentially 420 properties could be flooded going forward. So I say to you that work needs to be commenced as a priority. What we need now is for you to work with National Resources Wales Welsh Water and the community together with the residents group to put things in place and help residents protect their properties with a property level flood resilience grant. However, we are where we are and we need reassurance of the following: cleaning of the drains and maintaining roads in Dinas Powys to be undertaken quarterly. Work with the National Flood Forum, National Resources Wales, Welsh Water and the residents to put in place actions to assist with flooding in Dinas Powys, short, medium, long term. Want short, medium term done before autumn 2021 for reassurance to the residents and to give us peace of mind. Work with the residents to develop a community flood plan. And finally, as a county council on the 23rd of December, you did not deliver to the residents in Dinas Powys, and you should be ashamed of your failure and take actions to correct as a matter of priority. You did not coordinate.
3 minutes.
Oh, let her finish. Damn.
Can I finish? You did not coordinate emergency arrangements. You did not maintain safe conditions on the roads. You did not put flood warning signs on the highway. You did not organise road closures or traffic diversions. And you did not clear blockages on the highway drainage system. You did not take action to protect property for flooding by water from the highways due to your failure of the highways draining system. That last paragraph is that from the Environmental Agency as a duty of care by County Council. I finish. Thank you for letting me carry on.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Gilligan. Right, do we have any members of the committee who wish to ask for any just clarification around any points that Mrs. Gilligan has raised? Yeah, Councillor John.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mrs. Gilligan, firstly, I'd like to offer you my sincere sorry to see what has happened down with you in Dinas. I've a lot of experience in flooding in Llantwit Major since 1999. What I would ask you is, are you near a river, or was it just flooding caused by highways water off the highway? Thank you.
Do you want me to respond to that now?
Yeah, if you could just briefly, yeah, please.
It's both. Obviously, I've got the stream behind me, the brook, but it didn't only come from the front, from the back of my house. It came from the front because the street was like a river. It was actually on BBC Wales. So you know, people lost their cars in the street because at the bottom of Penny Turnpike, which is at the end of my road, it was waist deep, and that was not all from the brook. So it was a combination of all factors. You know, the council needs to be reactive, not proactive.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Gilligan. Right, I've got no other points of clarification. So thank you for your time, Mrs. Gilligan. And I hope you're going to stay for the rest of the meeting as well to hear the rest of the discussion. I'm going to go to speaker number 2 then, which is Dr. Max Wallace. Dr. Wallace, are you with us? Right, I can't actually see him on my list either. He was, oh yes I can. Dr. Wallace, are you with?
Chair, shall we give
me,
Dr. Wallace a call?
Oh, right,
Okay. That's
right,
okay.
thank you, Dr. Wallace. Welcome, Councillor Robertson. I'm glad you're able to join us as well. Okay, so Dr. Max Wallace, you've got, same with Mrs. Gilligan, you've got 3 minutes to speak.
Are you ready?
Okay, yeah, and officers will let you know when you're coming towards the end of that. So over to you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you. The first point to make is the storm was not extreme rainfall. We are near, that's Cosmiston I'm talking about, is very close to Cogmoors, and the rainfall measure from Cogmoors by Doug Cymru said there was a standard, well, said there was 45 millimetres, and that compares with the standard that they calculate for 4-hour flood. A 4-hour storm was 65 millimetres. An extreme storm is 65, not 45 as we got. We're supposed to plan for climate change, in which the extreme storm is to be about 90 millimetres if it's a 4-hour storm. Longer storms are a bit more, but we're supposed to be planning for a lot, that about double the flood. storm that we got on the 23rd of December. The flood map Wales, which comes out and predicts the storms in our area, was new, just came the end of last year. And we can look at it for Cosmiston and Sully. It predicts a 100-year flood of the Sully Brook at Cosmiston. Sully Brook comes down the old Westbourne, and it predicts it floods over the golf course. It didn't. The flood came down Lavernock Road, but NRW's flood map predicts floods on Lavernock Road less than once every 100 years. It's not the extreme 100-year flood. So the NRW map predicted it quite wrong. The NRW flood map predicts it never gets on Cosmiston Car Park. It came over, flooded over Cosmiston Car Park into the lake. Completely different from what the flood map says. So the cause of our flooding is not the Sully Brook, as they claimed, NRW claimed. It was drains into the sewer, which just got completely full. It was sewer overload. Now, whether that was due to pumping, to companies pumping to Cogmoors, being under capacity, we don't know. It was bubbling up some of the drains from the sewer, and the next day it left a smell of sewage in Cosmiston Park. So it was a health hazard which hasn't been acknowledged. Cymru don't admit their sewer overload, and they keep permitting more connections of housing to their sewer. Bailey Glamorgan approves attenuation ponds. Attenuation ponds were overtopped. The new one at Culverhouse Cross was overtopped and it flooded down onto the road. Attenuation ponds they have approved for the Cosmiston development is sized according to average rainfall, not the storm rainfall.
Last 3 minutes, Chair.
Yeah, and they've approved, I just say, they've improved a discharge to Sully Brook at 128 litres per second, yet it only has 1 litre a second. The Vale drainage people are not doing their job properly, and that's what we want you to look at.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wallace. Right, if any committee members wish to ask Dr. Wallace for any points of clarification?
Yes, Chair, if it's all right.
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Driscoll. Max, you say it's not an extreme. You say it wasn't extreme, but everyone else says 45 millimetres in 4 hours is near as damn it a 1 in 100-year occurrence. And the other question, you were talking about sewer overload. Was that in just Cosmiston on Dinas Powys as well? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Well, I'm informed that down Penny Turnpike, it was bubbling out of the sewer as well, instead of going down the drain.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not only there. In Sully, it must have been similar. It was coming down, well, where it got flooded was never done before. And the sewer the drainage just wasn't taking it away. It has in the past. And we don't believe that it was blockage of drains all over the place. Drains were quite clear. In Fort Road, Lavernock, down the hill, it was bubbling out of the drain there. And the drains are very clear. It's not a problem of maintenance of the drains. In our area, it was clearly the sewer wasn't taking it. At the end of the sewer, at 5 o'clock, suddenly, just about the end of the storm, suddenly everything disappeared. It went down extremely quickly. This was because the drains started functioning at that time.
Okay, right. Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Right, I've got no other point of clarification. So,
sorry, Chair, can I go back? I didn't think you clarified the 45 millimetres in 4 hours question. No, you're muted. Sorry, Max. Sorry, maybe again.
Dr. Wallace, you're muted.
Yeah. Friends of the Earth wrote to NRW asking what was the extreme storm for that corresponding to that, and they said it was 65 millimetres, not 45. And that was without what they call climate uplift, which is allowance for the extra rain to be expected under climate change. That uplift takes it, instead of 65 millimetres, it takes it up to something like 85 or 90 millimetres in a 4-hour storm. There are longer storms in which, different amounts, but the 4-hour storm is what we really had at the centre on 23rd of December. And NRW have confirmed that this extreme is 65 and not 45 millimetres. They've told Dinas Powys in the briefing, and we've got all their storm records. It looks interesting. Over 11 hours, it was 57 millimetres. Now, this is substantially more than what Miles Punter has told us, but that must be for a different place. We got it heavily in Cogmoors, Dinas Powys and Cosmiston. We must have been in the centre, the worst part of the storm. And we can tell that because the nearest other monitor that we've got is up at on the Ely River, just down at whatever they call it, just down on the bridge there, the Ely River, and that was a lesser storm than we got down in Dinas Powys and Cogmoors.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wallace, for that clarification. Right, I've got no other points of clarification. So, again, thank you for your time, Dr. Wallace, and for speaking. I hope you'll be able to stay now for the rest of the meeting and hear the further discussion and debate. You're most welcome. I'm going to move on to speaker number 3 then, which is Mrs. Ruth Brennan. Okay, I think it just takes a little minute just to sort of swap people around. Hi, Mrs. Brennan.
Hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for coming along this evening. Or not coming along, is it? Sorry, we're all remote. I keep forgetting that. As I said to other speakers, you've got 3 minutes to speak. We will come up in the chat with telling you when there's 1 minute remaining. And then committee members, I'll ask if any committee members wish to have any points of clarification about anything that you've talked about. Okay, so it's over to you, and your 3 minutes will start now.
Sorry, Chair. Can we just ask Dr. Wallace to turn his camera off, please, before Ruth starts?
Okay, Dr. Wallace, could you just turn your camera off? Sorry, Mrs. Brennan, just bear with us a minute. Right, okay. Okay, Mrs. Brennan, it's over to you then.
Okay. I personally feel that there possibly could have been a specific reason that this event occurred, as the majority of houses that were affected had been built over 52 years ago and had never ever suffered anything like this before. And me myself having 11 inches of water in my home for the very first time ever. So we need to know, was it simply the case of various obstructions, debris, vegetation, silt and rubble, raising the level of the riverbed, etc., which was due to a total lack of maintenance over many, many years by the 3 bodies already mentioned. You've got NRW, who admit themselves that the channel has not been cleared or dredged for over 10 years, Vale of Glamorgan Council for the lack of maintenance of the drains, sewers, etc., and Welsh Water with storm drains. Has it also been proved that the Cadoxton tidal outlet at the Bendricks in Barry was left working as it should have and could have been over the Christmas break? When did the company Dyer and Butler contractors leave the site prior to the Christmas break? How long was the site left unmanned? And was their use of remote monitoring rather than being physically on site diligently adhered to? Was the exceptional amount of rainfall on that day programmed into their system in order for the pumps to be able to cope with all that water? I would like to know if NRW have received the data logs for that period from Dyer and Butler to show how effectively the pumps were working or not, maybe. And were they even capable of coping with such an unprecedented amount of water? I do not find it acceptable that the company has simply told NRW that all was in order. We as a community that have suffered so much must be shown the evidence. And why is this flood defence system work more than 2 years behind schedule? Has it also been proved that the tank at the Hexion plant on the chemical site, was it working as it should have been? Again, evidence to that effect must be shown. It is simply not good enough to take the word of these two companies. They must prove to all concerned with hard evidence that everything was in order. And with hindsight being a wonderful thing, many of the residents would like to know if NRW will consider revisiting the possibility of a dam being built further upstream, especially since the unprecedented event of the 23rd of December. NRW also suggested building walls along the riverbanks for those properties directly in danger of being flooded, as they have already done for some of the properties in St Cadoc's Close. The houses in St Lythan Close on Sunnycroft bore the brunt of the recent flood for the first time ever since they were built, and would very much welcome any flood defences put in place, which hopefully will help to avoid this in the future. We're not looking to blame, but we just want simply a reason or a cause in order to prevent this from ever happening again.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Brennan. Okay, have we got anybody in committee members who would like to ask Mrs. Brennan for any points of clarification? No? Okay.
Can I just say, I do live right on the river. All we've got is a footpath between our garden and the river, and it was the river that overflowed. It wasn't the water, you know, it wasn't the amount of rain, it was the river that came in.
Okay.
Chair, can I come in?
Yes, Councillor Driscoll, yeah.
Hello, Ruth. I hope you're bearing up all right. Did you mention that the water went down quickly as well, or was that just...
It went down within about an hour, from about 9:30 till 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Right, I've got no other points of clarification there. So thank you, Mrs. Brennan, for coming along and speaking to us this evening. I mean, our thoughts do go to you and every other resident affected and business about this flooding. I hope you can stay for the rest of the meeting and hear any sort of further discussion and debate as well. But thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Bob Penrose now, who's local councillor for Sully. So Councillor Penrose, you've got up to 5 minutes to speak. And again, if there's any points of clarification then from committee members, we'll ask those then. So it's over to you. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, for affording me the opportunity to address the committee this evening as one of the elected members for the Sully ward. On the afternoon and evening of the 23rd of December 2020, myself, Councillor Marnie, were involved in assisting residents of some 30 plus residential properties to prevent flooding to their properties where the water depth in some areas exceeded 2 feet. We assisted by trying to secure sandbags and assisted in the evacuation of vulnerable residents together with the emergency services. Unfortunately, in most instances, the efforts of myself, Councillor Marnie and the residents were thwarted by the pure volume of water, with flooding occurring to the ground floors of a majority of the property, causing extensive damage. There was also extensive damage to numerous business premises along Sully Moors Road, estimated at £250,000. In addition to the road being closed for 48 hours, and also Hayes Road being closed by flooding for 4 days. At the time, the emergency response lines to both the Vale of Glamorgan Council and National Resources Wales being somewhat inadequate, including the provision of sandbags. Subsequent to the flooding, we have had 3 meetings with the Vale Council, Taylor Wimpey, National Resources Wales, and in spite of being invited to all 3 meetings, Welsh Water have failed to attend any meetings so far. The outcome of these meetings to date are the following will be implemented, namely the submission of Section 19 report to Welsh Government from the Vale of Glamorgan Council, with the report being derived from a private sector experts. The future better provision of sandbags, improved communication and control at the Vale of Glamorgan Council, analysis of the cause of flooding and future provision to prevent future flooding, and the Vale Glamorgan Council NRW will check and ensure that all drains, culverts, watercourses in their control will be cleaned and fully operational. I would add that in this, all parties have been most cooperative. However, all these proposals are very well and good, but it doesn't alleviate the residents' fears of future flooding, and what is required is decisive action by the Vale Glamorgan Council to instigate an immediate flood prevention programme in these areas. We don't really want the matter to drag on for months and years. These people are in fear every time there's heavy rainfall of a reoccurrence of the flooding. I would also like to stress that the areas of incidence of the flooding have been reported by Councillor Marnie and myself on 3 previous occasions since 2030, with no improvement schemes ever implemented. In conclusion, I would like to say that I'm sure we're all aware of the stress and anxiety caused, but we did also in these incidents have a risk to human life. I was involved myself with some residents in rescuing 2 people out of the floodwater, quite elderly people. It is a very, very serious subject, which I'm pleased to say, Chair, that you acknowledge with your introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Have we got any committee members who would like any points of clarification from Councillor Penrose? No? Okay. Well, thank you for your input there, Councillor Penrose. And again, I hope you'll be able to stay around for the rest of the meeting as well. I'm going to hand back over to Miles. And I'm going to ask you, Miles, to respond to the points raised by the residents and Councillor Penrose. Obviously, some very pertinent points raised there, and a bit of a recurring theme around those questions, particularly around how it seems to be that this water receded so very quickly. That's apparent. Everybody has raised that. And also around, I'm also very disappointed about what Councillor Penrose said around Welsh Water not attending any meetings at all, of those meetings that have been held, which personally I don't think is acceptable. I think it's something that, we need to take forward. But anyway, Miles, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you, Chair. If I deal with Mrs. Gilligan's points first, there's some crossover. So if I miss anything, please pick me up. I've tried to write everything down. So Mrs. Gilligan was asking why it came about. Clearly, it was an unusual event for Mrs. Gilligan. And what I can say to that is, this is what the Section 19 report does, because a lot of people have a theory as to what's happened. You've heard a few of them being mentioned. Was it the council's highway drains? Was it the river? Was it a combination of both? So the Section 19 report, and the reason it's done by an independent body, is to tease those issues out with the assistance of the residents, and that's why it's so important for you, all residents, to fill these questionnaires in. One of the things I will say though, and Dinas is unlike the other areas mentioned, is the vast majority of the drains in Dinas Powys drain into the river or into the combined sewer system. And what happened when the river is full, the drains have got nowhere to go. So they will give the impression of being full because the water has nowhere to go. So what happened in Dinas in terms of the drains was affected to a large extent by the fact that the river was in spate, was full. And our current drain cleaning, gully cleaning regime is drains are cleaned between 15 and 20 months. Sounds a long period. We've got 2 gully emptiers, but we have to do the whole Vale, and we only have limited finances. So, and I'll just pose a question for you really. If the absence of a gully maintenance regime was the main reason why there was flooding in Dinas Powys, then why wasn't there flooding everywhere else? Because this is the system, whether you like it or not. This is the schedule that we have in place currently for the whole of the Vale and Morgan. So the other thing I'll say about gullies is I've given a commitment to this. What's very obvious to me is our gully cleaning regime is linear. So wherever you live, it depends on the A roads and the classification of the road, but it doesn't depend on flood risk. So what we're doing as a team, and we will do it before the outcome of the report on Section 19, is we're reviewing our frequency of gully emptying for those areas in particular that are more sensitive to flooding. because that makes a lot of sense. And Mrs. Gilligan and others have picked this up. I cannot commit to doing this quarterly. I don't know whether there's a single council out there that cleans their gullies quarterly, because it would be very expensive to do that, and I don't know whether we would have that funding. But certainly, in terms of addressing the frequency to more fit the risk, then I can give a commitment to do that. Mrs. Gilligan asked us what we're doing in the short and the medium and long term. I tried, and I wasn't in any way trying to big myself up by opening up, telling you about the flood risk management schemes I've been involved with, to suggest that there is a solution in some cases, and there is a process that I've been involved in previously, which has sometimes involved a very large flood risk management scheme at the end. The short-term arrangement is to gather the evidence to make sure that whatever solutions we put in are the right solutions for the problem. So the question is, we've got out the Section 19 report. That's the short-term measure. We've already provided sandbags to the Community Council, and we've updated our website with more information. So that's the short. The medium to long term is the outcomes of the Section 19 report. Now, members will be aware, and I'll raise it now, that Natural Resources Wales put forward an attenuation scheme for Dinas Powys. The attenuation scheme was shelved last June, the 2020. And if I can read you just an extract, it's available on the website. But this was an extract from the Dinas Powys River Flooding Project Outcome Summary. And it says the upstream flood storage option is the most viable option, but has a marginal economic case, may have several significant potential impacts, and lacks broad community support. So to pursue this option will be very challenging. And the main reason that comment is made is because there's quite a lot of issues in terms of responses that were negative to what they were proposing, this attenuation upstream. They had 400 responses at the time. The project outcome report goes on to say investment could benefit up to 197 homes and 19 businesses in Dinas Powys. They'll be less likely to flood from the Cyson River. So I believe that NRW are duty bound to revisit this. And I know it's not going to suit everybody because it does involve some work in public open spaces. But if anyone wants to see what this type of scheme would look like, I would invite them to come to Colebrook and to have a look at the one that's in the Colebrook catchment. Yes, it's a reservoir when the rain is very heavy, but for the other 300 odd days of the year, it's a park, and it's got grass in it and children playing in it. So yeah, they have to look at this again because it's the elephant in the room, essentially. But not just this. One of the other things that I'd like to talk about briefly is individual property protection. So back to this medium and long-term solution. What we could do, if we've done this in Llantwit Major, we've done it in Llanmason, and Gwyn will know because he was involved in it with myself, is we can install individual protection for properties, which is effectively sluice gates that block off doors. We can tank the properties to a certain level, move air bricks and that sort of thing, which gives them protection from flash flooding. And it's worked in Llantwit Major, it's in Turkey Street, it's worked at Llanmace. So I think when I'm talking about medium to long-term solutions, the sort of thing we're looking at for Dinas Powys is better management of the river flows, some form of attenuation, coupled with property protection for individual properties, and a really good community flood risk management plan, which Mr. Gilligan also mentioned, which we're very happy to be fully involved in. Mrs. Gilligan mentioned living in fear. Fully accept that. I've never experienced it, but I can understand every time it rains, you think the same is going to happen again. And I can fully accept that. So time is of the essence. We've got the National Flood Forum coming in Dinas, and we will work with NRW and Welsh Water and the forum on community resilience. Mrs. Gilligan then talks about our response and said it was woeful. I will make the point again, and I think this is a question of us making sure that members of the public know exactly what our role is. We are not an emergency service as far as flooding is concerned. Though we knew that we were having significant rain, our vehicles were stuck in the same traffic as everyone else was stuck in when they were trying to close roads. We have no special permission. We have no blue lights. We cannot push our way through places. So there were roads we'd like to have shut earlier. We couldn't get to them. We opened a flood room, which is an emergency flood room, in the afternoon, and I was in work, and we did what we could, but essentially we're not an emergency service. So we need to make sure that the expectations of us are not higher than they should be. Yes, we should have shut the roads earlier, and I would have liked to have done that, but in many cases we couldn't get to them, and we were asking for the assistance of the police in those cases. We need to update our website because we need to make sure that the information to our residents is better than it was, and we need to increase our phone lines so that you can get through, and that was one of the problems. I understand that residents felt isolated, and we need to work on that because that's not how they should feel, and the very least they should get from us is good advice 24/7. So I am working on that. So in terms of Mr. Wallace's submission, the issue about whether it was extreme rainfall or not extreme rainfall, I think that depends where the rain gauge is, essentially. I am taking the advice of what NRW have told me, but it will be a factor in the Section 19 report, that the actual level of the event. I don't control NRW's flood risk management plans, and Dr. Wallace knows that, but I will take that information back to Tim England and ask him to review his plans. They will do that anyway as a result of the Section 19 work, because it's new information. Most, if not all, flood plans are done on computers as models, so they need real events to properly inform their plans. So I'll do that. In terms of planning now, TAN 15's been out for some time, and the way we deal with planning applications now is totally different to the way we dealt with them prior to that time. We are the SUD's approval body, so as a local authority we have statutory powers to prevent development going ahead if the drainage is not as it should be. And new development, we're much more on top of that than we were previously because of the fact the legislation has changed. But we have an ongoing legacy of property building in floodplains. Houses last 120, God knows how many years. And we do have this issue of houses being built over years and not that far away from now on floodplains, and we have to deal with that. But it's a reality, and it really shouldn't happen, and that's part of the problem here. Mr. Wallace mentions attenuation ponds overtopping. Happy to have a look at those to make sure that they're within the design statements. Just to give you an idea, highways is designed for a 1 in 30 year storm, which is fairly frequent. When we design flood risk management schemes, we tend to design for a 1 in 100 plus an element for climate change. But highways are not designed to take more than a 1 in 30, and they will flood. In most cases, they don't affect private property. They flood and they become either impassable or passable with care. And the sewers are overloaded. I have had email exchanges with Welsh Water, and they have said they had overload issues throughout the network in terms of water getting into their system. So there would have been sewers popping up because some of them were combined. So they had rainwater going into them as well. And some of them are old and perhaps need to be redesigned. So that did happen. And just to mention on that water disappearing quickly, that is not an unusual phenomenon. That is what happens. Essentially, when the rain stops, the system is capable of taking an amount of water. Once the actual loading reduces, it disappears very quickly. And I don't think people should read into there was a blockage and it whooshed away, and that's not how it happens. If you talk to NRW, the experts here, they'll tell you that is what happens. Usually when the rain stops, because the system can take a certain amount of loading, it dissipates very quickly. So it's not, I wouldn't want people to think that there was something strange that happened on that evening. In terms of Mrs. Brennan's specific reason for the flooding, I fully understand that. We all want an explanation, and that is what the Section 19 report will provide for you. Lack of maintenance is mentioned, and again, I referred to that. I have the figures here. We actually cleaned 11 streets, the gullies in 11 streets in Dinas Powys before the 23rd of December. We started on the 15th, but there's a lot more streets than that. We attended to a further 40 streets by the 12th of February, and we've got 71 streets remaining, which we will deal with within the next 28 days. And what we would tend to do anyway is we would always visit, or we generally visit areas where there's been flooding, because what happens with flood water is it brings debris with it and it blocks the gullies, so we have to go there anyway. But I will undertake to review our frequency of gully cleaning in that area. Mrs. Brennan mentions a tidal outfall in Dyer and Butler. I met with NRW and Hexion and Cabot and others to talk about how it all functioned. A concern was raised there about the Dyer and Butler outfall work and the dam they put in place, were the pumps working. And NRW have committed to provide a report which will be for public consumption on that outfall. This will feed into the work that we're doing, so that we can start to build a picture of what happened. Hexion have advised us, and Councillor Penrose was there, that they've not seen a situation like it. And the chappie who was presenting had been working for Hexion, I think, for 20 years plus. Their pumps were working, they were clearing the site and they were clearing the highway, but they've never seen levels like that before. So the questions are raised of NRW. Why is the work to deal with the outfall taken so long? They advised that they were under the control of the contractor, and they were there's only so much they could do. But that point was made strongly by Councillor Penrose and others that this work has taken too long. So NRW is producing a report on that, which we can share with you, which deals with the outfall at the Bendrix end. And Mrs. Brennan mentions no blame. She just wants solutions. There's never really a solution that I can say to you that would solve flooding. I've never ever given that statement. What we work to do is to reduce the risk, and that is our commitment, and to mitigate the risk better. So we will do everything we can in our powers to do that with the assistance of Welsh Government, because these schemes are expensive to implement, even if it's only individual property protection. Talking about 150 properties here, probably £5,000 each, at least. So that's a lot of money, and that's why we've been meeting regularly with ministers to make sure we keep this at the agenda. So hopefully, Chair, I've covered most of the points raised there.
Okay, thank you, Miles. I'm going to bring in now. Do we have any cabinet members who wish to speak with any points of clarification before I open this up to committee? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Peter King, did you want to? Is this around points of clarification at the moment about points that have been raised? So,
no, Chair. No, Chair. But I would like to speak before a bit before. But you know, I want the committee to have a chance next. But I would like to contribute if I may.
Yeah. Okay. I'll bring some committee members in first, if that's okay, and then I will open up to cabinet members. Okay. So the first speaker I've got is Councillor Vince Driscoll. Councillor Driscoll.
Yeah. Hi there. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Miles, and thanks for all the work you've been doing since the flood. I know it's not easy for you. A couple of questions, really. The system was woeful before the 23rd. Hopefully, if it happens again, then the council will step up and help out. You see it on the news. Doncaster Council delivering sandbags to individual houses. That's great. Maybe we could have something system here like that. Maybe something kicks in like the gritting type operation. So when the temperature gets to a certain level, or when the rain gets to a certain level, then things, all of a sudden your team kicks in and gets working. I have to call you out on the not being able to close the roads. I got back and forth to your council yard 4 times collecting sandbags for different people, closing the roads, closing Greenfield Avenue, Cardiff Road, Millbrook Road would have made a huge difference to the houses along there, because every time a car went through there, they sent a tidal wave back into the houses. It was awful. I would like to know when the drains were cleaned out last. You say 15 to 20 months they're cleaning. That's fine, but were they the ones in question cleaned 19 and a half months ago? In which case, you know. I don't accept that was the main reason for flooding, but I don't think it helped. You mentioned the river in Spate. It was in Spate in February, and we had no floods then. I don't know why the drains weren't blocked then, or the roads weren't blocked, as the river was quite high. The cleanup operation, I'd like to thank Colin Smith. Colin Smith was exceptional. He's been wonderful. Anything we wanted, he's done it. He supplied the skips. We had a fantastic response from the local community, the rugby club, Dinas Powys Rugby Club, Penarth Rugby Club. We had a number of councillors, Councillor Cave, Councillor Bailey, Rowlands, Steve Griffiths, who incidentally his house flooded as well, which is very, very sad for him, as long as it is as well it is for everybody else. Councillor Robson, Alan Cairns was out, Matt Smith was out. There was a lot of people out helping clean, and it made a massive difference, and it gave it gave the residents a bit of reassurance that people are thinking about them and are there to help. Going forward, NRW are not doing their job, Miles. We all know that. They make the noises, they attend the meetings, but at the end of the day, it's 2 months on now. That river needs dredging. They've got no commitment. They've made no commitment to do it. I believe it's the council's duty to take them to court over it. If that's what needs doing, do it. My opinion is they're refusing to do it. They don't want to do it. The first words when Tim Marshall was asked about it, the first word that came out, he said, the ecology of the river. Oh, come on. Oh, no one wants to ruin the ecology, but when you're talking about 200 houses at risk, right, I think a little bit of ecology could be pushed to one side at the time. The dam, it does need revisited, as you said. The scheme they wanted wasn't popular, but unfortunately the Save the Woods campaign was stronger than the people that wanted the dam, and there weren't many of them, I must admit that. But also I believe the decision should have been made by the 200 houses at risk of flooding, and not people who lived in barriers just like the Visit the Woods and Dinas Powys, which weren't going to disappear anyhow. One of the questions I'd like to ask is, would you consider changing the drain policy from 15 to 20 months? I know you said you haven't got the manpower. I'm not talking about every street in Dinas Powys. I'm talking about the 5 streets that were badly affected. If we could just bring a scheme in where they're cleared or checked and maintained every 6 months, that would give a lot of reassurance to people. What else have I got? Lots actually, but NRW did commit in 2000 under the Environment Agency 2000 in their policy that they dredge the river every 8 years. They failed in that one. So anyway, that's enough for me for now. So I'll leave it to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Driscoll. As Councillor Driscoll, there were lots of people who did actually go along and help at the flooding event. They did, and officers as well, and many members of the public, as well as lots of elected members as well.
Yeah, I hope I thanked them as well. Sorry if I missed them out.
Well, you thanked them, yeah. Right, okay. Did you want to respond, Miles, or do you want to take a couple more questions from other councillors first?
Entirely up to you, Chair. I can respond to those, but I might answer someone else's question.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, I'll go on to the next councillor then. So we got Councillor Michael Morgan waiting to speak. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, here I am.
Okay.
Yeah, well, just first of all, with great sympathy to the people of Sully and Dinas Powys who were affected by these floods, and I'm grateful to Miles for his detailed report so far on the matter. Now, my ward is Peterston Super Ely, which is mentioned in this report. And obviously, we're not so adversely affected as the good people of Sully and Dinas Powys, but we are affected. Certainly, since October 2019, the River Ely here has burst its banks, I think, 5 times. Property isn't damaged to the extent of other places, but it does mean that over 100 houses are cut off for a period of time. And it is something that has increased in the last year. Certainly, I remember in the past, we might have had a flood every 3 years or so, but it's becoming more frequent. And this is not a blame game, but there is something which is increasing the problem, whether it's climate change or maintenance or whatever. So my question really is, in this report, are you please going to include places other than Sully and Dinas Powys are we going to be included in Peterston, so that people can understand why these events are happening and what could be done about it. I mean, I know before Christmas, residents were in the river clearing out debris which was blocking the bridge to alleviate the flooding. Where can things be improved? So that's the question. Are we going to be included, or are we going to be ignored in this report?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morgan. I'm going to bring in Councillor Gwyn John next. Gwyn?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, first of all, I would just like to confirm what Miles has said about floodgates. As I mentioned, I have been involved in this since 1999, since I first came on the council, and I've had huge experience through the years of flooding, both helping people with sewage coming in, but Miles is spot on regarding the floodgates. The floodgates put up in Turkey Street in the houses there. Some people are reluctant to take floodgates because they feel that if they come to sell their house is blighted. But the sensible people will put floodgates on, and the people in Turkey Street, and again in Landmace, it's helped people in Landmace, in Tilhouse Close, situation there where people were getting flooded regularly, not just once a winter, but twice in some cases. One lady was flooded 3 times. So I would say that is a great help, and I would recommend that to anyone, that if they are in fear of flooding, NRW can fit floodgates. The council now have got a system through Clive Moon to look after you in that respect. The other thing I'd like to mention is drainage. Now, the big problem is, I noticed tonight that a lady said that it's an older part of Dinas Powys where she was flooded. In Lantford Major, the older parts, again, often you see the water, when it's hammering down, the water is flooded all over the road. It can't get away because the drains are not big enough to take it. And the situation is that, sure enough, when it stops, it'll drain away. But the drains just cannot take the amount of water that's coming down. In the case where Miles said of it drains into the river, this was a problem we had in Boverton. And what the council did was, with the river coming through the centre of Boverton, they changed the line of the highway drainage away from the culvert instead of in front of the culvert, which was only putting water straight in, and it was just coming back up the drains, making it worse. So quite honestly, since we've had the culvert in Boverton completed, I'll be honest with you, I can walk down there now in pouring rain, and it's virtually at the bottom level on that culvert. And the people there are ever so grateful after being flooded so many times. The big problem today, I would just add, is that we've built and built and built. And hard standings, where we used to have farmers' fields were ploughed and water would land in the furrows and drain through the field. Now we've hit in people that have put hard standings instead of their gardens, their lawns, and subsequently, where's the water going to go? And that's what we're suffering. And it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. So we've all got to look at this and be realistic. I see people all the time paving slab their front of their houses, and that is a big, big problem. I thought you had to have planning permission for that, but nobody bothers to check it, and it goes down. So what I would say to people is, please think about it before you put a hard standing down, because you could end up getting flooded. I would like to say that, the team brought out sandbags. Yet again, sandbags only act virtually very, very short time. They're not a preventive for flooding. The water will drain through the sandbags. And they usually break. The hessian bags will break and leave the sand everywhere. Once everything's dried up, you can see the mess around the communities with broken sandbags. It doesn't give us the answer to flooding. But I will say this, the staff worked ever so hard, and Kevin Smith and his team were out in Landmace the morning that the rain really started coming down, and they cleaned the drains the night before. But still the drains couldn't take it because there was so much of it. And the drains just cannot take water. It's an old community, 4-inch drains, not enough. We can't do much about this. It would cost the earth. But we got to be realistic about this in the future. Miles, I thank you and your team. You're doing a grand job. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor John, who, as many of us know, has had years of experience with flooding in the area that you live in. And I'm really pleased to hear that you say about the floodgates have actually had a very positive impact, and also the culvert work as well. So I'm really pleased to hear that. I'm going to bring in Councillor Andy Robertson now. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to Miles and his team for their efforts, and I'd like to echo what Vince said. Colin Smith was absolutely magnificent after the event. Now, my main concern, Miles, is I'm very impressed by your ideas about how we can look at things going on from this. My concern is that in, say, 3 or 4 years, 5 years, there hasn't been any flooding, that our guard will drop, and that there will be the level of vigilance that we need to contend with this. I think one of the things that people in Dinas particularly are concerned about is the lack of maintenance on the course of the stream, the Cadoxton, particularly between Dinas Powys and Barry. I totally appreciate that this isn't actually hugely a council issue. This is much more an NRW issue. But when the people of Dinas Powys in 2 or 3 years' time see that there hasn't been any work being done, the guard's gone down, what can we do to make sure that we keep a level of vigilance that will protect the people who are at risk better? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Robertson. I've got one more speaker for the moment, which is Councillor Vince Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just echo what's been said before. Colin did a top job after the event, yeah, and also worth a special mention, of course, to the Dinas Powys football and rugby teams and the Penarthians, who were out in big numbers and made a huge difference in the clean-up side of things. It was a monumental effort, in fairness. Just 2 things quickly. Touching on what Lynn said, I did see some houses that I visited when I was helping the clear-up operation, where they'd taken steps to build up walls to protect their own homes from flooding. And the problem is that if another house on the street hasn't done so, it gets breached elsewhere. And despite your best efforts, you can end up with absolute devastation. And I saw houses where, it was several meters up the wall. The mess that it had caused is, permanent, expensive. We've heard about the cost of the damage that's been done to these homes, and we really need to do everything that we possibly can. And I know that that's what this meeting's all about. I thought Vince had the makings of a proposal, and if that is the case, I'd like to support him on that. We're not asking for the council to commit funding throughout the whole of the area that we don't have, but in those several streets where it's most been affected, can we propose, or can we make a recommendation to Cabinet that we increase the regularity of the drain and gully clearance to, say, twice a year, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to mitigate against that? I think that's what Vince was proposing, and perhaps he can come in and tell me if I'm right on that, because I'd like to second that if that's the case. And then just
yes, that's sorry, that's exactly what I was saying. Thank you, Councillor Bailey.
Right. Thank you. So that's a proposal?
Yes, please, Chair.
I didn't hear it as a proposal, but if that's a proposal we'd like to put forward, then that's fine.
But I think it makes sense for those several streets that are most affected. It's an immediate sign that we could be doing that we will be doing something as a council to help prevent this from happening. And the other suggestion is that we do write as a committee to NRW to remind them that it's our view that they need to take action. They can't afford to be shirking responsibility for remedial efforts that need to take place to make sure this doesn't happen again. Because, as it was said just before by Andy, my concern is that a couple of years down the line, we don't end up with these circumstances arising and we think that we're out of the water. Unfortunate pun there. And we just need to do everything we absolutely can. So if we can also write as a committee, I'd like to propose to NRW to ask them to take action, based on some of the recommendations that and ideas that came from your report there, Miles. Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Okay, Miles, oh, sorry, I'll just bring in one final councillor. I know you've got a list there to answer. Ruben, did you want to, Councillor Sivanium?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just quickly, first of all, to again to reiterate what other councillors have said this evening, that I am really sorry for what all those residents have experienced during those floods on the 23rd of December, and to thank Miles and his team for all that they've done that. And actually this evening Miles's presentation and report has been really thorough, so thank you very much for that, Miles. Really my question really was about the section 19 report, and to ask Miles whether the people that are going to do the report, whether they will actually consult with also NRW and Welsh Water. That was it, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ruba. Okay, Miles, you've got quite a few points there, so would you like to respond to them, please? Right, Miles, you're on mute.
I do my best work on mute. Sorry about that, Chair. Okay, in terms of Councillor Driscoll's comments initially, again about our emergency response and the system is, to use his words, woeful. I think we're not an emergency service. That's the first thing to say. I accept the fact that we should have closed roads earlier, but we had as many staff as we could spare out there doing that, and there were issues all over the Vale. So we need to learn lessons in terms of the road closures. I accept that, and we have done. One of the issues, which is a problem for me, and I just to explain a little bit about my world a little bit, we still had on that day, believe it or not, a prediction of an overnight frost. So I had staff on standby, both drivers and operators for winter maintenance, who I daren't ask to come into work in case they were needed to cover the winter maintenance service a bit later on that evening. As it happened, it stayed above 1 degree, so we didn't go out. But we need to work on a system that works all year round and gives me the level of resource that we need, whether there's a chance of winter maintenance or a chance of not. So I accept that point. It's enough for members to say they think our response was woeful. It clearly means I have to work on it, either to explain myself better or to increase the resource. So I take that, and we will do what we can. Part of that was delivering the sandbags to communities so they get up there quicker, because with all the resource in the world, we're not going to get to every area if it was a whole Vale downpour. So we'll work with our community councils, I think, on that. And I'll go on to say Councillor Robertson's point about how do we keep this fresh, which is another point I'll make shortly. I mentioned about closing roads. We should have been there to close them quicker. We did have some issues with being stuck in traffic. And once you're stuck in it, you can't go backwards or forwards. So we'd left the depot and we were just stuck in it. So we need to improve in that regard, and I accept that point. Drain cleaning was raised as being a constant, and yes, we will review that. And as I've said before, it needs to be targeted better in terms of risk. Councillor Driscoll mentions why didn't it happen in February, because the river was high then. Well, let's see what the Section 19 report says, because it takes all those factors into account. And some of these questions, to be quite frank, I'd like answered myself. So that's why it's important to gather all the evidence. Thank you for the comments in regard to Colin Smith and his attendance. I did ask him to attend. He didn't just turn up on his own, and he's one of my top officers, and I was certain that he would sort out the waste issues for residents, which is the least we could do at that time. NRW not doing their job. It's a pity. In hindsight, perhaps I should have invited them last chair for you to invite them perhaps to this meeting, because there's been a lot of debate about what they should or shouldn't be doing. Just a word of caution, and I'm not going to take their side, but it seems sensible, doesn't it, when you talk about flooding, to move the water very quickly from your area to the next. Please bear in mind that Sully was flooded. So if you're not attenuating the water somewhere upper of Dinas Powys, the likelihood is it's going to go to the next conurbation and cause a problem down there. As it happens, Richard Gwynn School, which is on the Carrickston, was flooded. Any more water coming from Dinas Powys through either bigger pipes or faster channels runs a risk of affecting downstream. It's just, I need to make that point. Moving it around is great if you're close to the sea. But if you've got other communities between you and the sea, you've got to bear that in mind. So, in my view, attenuation is the right way. So hold it and then let it go into the system at a slower rate when the rainfall dies. And that, in combination with individual property protection, is probably the solution here. And then I think Councillor Driscoll mentioned, would I consider changing the drain policy as far as the street's concerned? Yes, I would. And I've already said I would do that. So Councillor Morgan mentions Peterson Super. Sorry, Councillor Morgan, I'm not ignoring the community, but in terms of our Section 19 response, it's a statutory duty when a certain number of properties are flooded, and as it didn't happen on this occurrence, we won't be looking at Peterson Super. But I'm more than happy to take his comments back and to send them to Tim England, NRW. And maybe ask what his proposals are for that area, but it wouldn't be part of the scope in terms of this work, primarily because it's quite strict, the scope in terms of properties affected, and in this case it's mostly Dinas Powys and Sully, but I can assure he's certainly not ignored. Thank Councillor John for his comments, and I've worked with him on the Bowerton flood risk management scheme for over 10 years. And he was a major driver there. We're now embarking on a scheme for Land Mace, and I'm meeting with Land Mace Community Council tomorrow night to talk about that scheme. So that, you know, it takes a long time though to give you an indication. The flooding in Colebrook happened in 2007, and the scheme didn't go in until 2014, and that's when we had the money to start the work. And I know that's frightening, but that is as long as that one took in order to get the money and to progress with the scheme. I think in that particular case, in terms of Colebrook, individual property protection wouldn't have been suitable because of the levels of the flows. So it was only a large flood management scheme that would have worked. Councillor John mentions the drainage. There are some systems of older drainage in Dinas Powys, and we are battling with that. But if the outcome of the Section 19 report says, for example, the drainage in a certain section of highway needs to be upgraded and that will reduce the risk, that's part of the mitigation measures that we would look at for funding from Welsh Government. So just because the drainage in a highway is substandard, if it's contributing significantly to the flooding, and if that's what the report says, and we can mitigate it significantly by doing some work there, then that's what we'd be asking Welsh Government for the funding to do. Councillor Robertson's comments. Thank you, Councillor Robertson, for your comments about the team, and your point about 3 or 4 years with no flooding and it'll be forgotten about. And this is a good point, because I'm no expert, I've not been flooded, but this is an extremely stressful situation. And one of the natural things for us to do as human beings is try and forget about it. So what happens, even those who've been flooded, once they're back in their properties and once they've settled, they want to put it behind them. Now, my view is that the way you keep it going, keep it fresh, is to set up a community flood risk management group. So the community, and I know that there's a lady called Hilary in Dennis Powers who's taken a bit of that role. The way you keep this going is to keep the community engaged. And one of the things that gave us the money, and it was about £10 million for Colebrook, was the Colebrook Flood Risk Management Group. And Councillor Brooks remember, because Councillor Brooks was on it. And I'd chaired this meeting for 18 months. And probably some of the most challenging meetings that I've ever had as a younger manager, because of the pain. I understand it. But because the community were together, they were able to present to Welsh Government as well as the local authority, and they were able to leave them money. So that is extremely important. The way you keep this fresh is the opposite of what you'd like to do and forget about it. You keep it fresh by the community setting up a group and challenging us and challenging NRW and challenging Welsh Government. That's the way you keep it fresh. Councillor Bailey raised the issue about individual property protection. Absolutely, this must be coordinated. You cannot stop anyone protecting their own property, but please, if anyone's thinking about it, ask them to consider that first, because you might protect yours and yours might be an island in a sea of pain for others, and that's not good. What you might find is if you hold out for a little longer, you might get financial support from Welsh Government, and we might be able to do a whole block of properties on that street. We can't stop people doing the work, but I would guard against it, because often you build in little dwarf walls and things, sends the water in weird directions, you end up flooding people that weren't flooded previously. So that's why the Section 19 report is important, because it looks at the community as a whole. And as for the committee writing to NRW, obviously it's a matter for you, and the frequency of gully emptying to every 6 months. Again, that's a matter for yourself as a committee. And in terms of Ruba's comment, yes, the Section 19 report will take account of the views of NRW and Welsh Water. They will be involved in the report, very much so, because they are two other water management organisations who have a role here.
Okay, thank you, Miles. I've got a couple of councillors who wish to speak again, but I would just a couple of things I've got to ask around is, do we have a likely date for this Section 19 report? Because I think this Section 19 report, I think, is critical for everybody, for the residents, for the council, and for the other organisations as well, because that's a joined up report, and that should actually give us some clear guidance on what we're going to do. So do we have a date of when that's expected by?
Yes, Chair. We've told the consultants we want it into us and ready to go out by the 31st of March.
Right. Okay.
So there's a lot of information to gather, but a lot of it's old knowledge. A lot of it's referring to flood risk management, desktop studies and stuff. So the sources are to hand. So whilst it's a big piece of work, most of the stuff is at your fingertips, save for the comments from the public, which are probably the most important in these reports. So yeah, 31st of March is our aim. Okay, thank you for that. And then also, I know we talked around a proposal forward, Vince, or Councillor Bailey, around writing to NRW to express our concerns, but I actually think it would be a better idea to actually ask them to come to committee and actually speak to us.
Sure, I think that's fair enough.
I think that's a really good option, because it's not just this instance, there's previous incidences, and it's going forward that we need actually a joined up group around this. So I think I'd like to write to them and actually ask them to attend a future committee.
For the recommendation as I worded it before, and go with what you're suggesting, that I think that would be more constructive as well, perhaps, rather than just sending an angry letter from disgruntled of Powers. Because
that's what I'm really conscious of, is that we need oh, excuse me a moment, to actually find a way forward and to actually make sure that we put as much in place and as much support to residents and businesses and to our communities as much as possible. So sorry, I got Councillor Driscoll and then Councillor Bailey. You wish to come back in, so just Councillor Driscoll, did you want to come in first?
Yeah, it was just something I touched on with Miles. I totally understand what you're saying, Miles, about getting the water through Dennis Powers quicker. If we had attenuation area upstream, that'd be great. There are smaller areas that could be used, but we've got the moors down there, Barry Moors, which are floodplains. Right? That can take a lot of water. But we've got a bridge in Dinas Powys. Why I'm asking for the river to be dredged is because we've got a bridge in Dinas Powys. Because of silt, the Cardiff Road Bridge now, at the outskirts of Dinas Powys, because of the silt underneath it, it's reduced to about 4 or 5 foot of space. Now you've got 10 foot of water trying to get through that. And that's not even, that wasn't even on the bad day, right? That was back in February. You've got 10 foot of water. Now that water then backs up probably a couple of 100 yards. That's a cause of flooding in a lot of those houses there. And that's why we're asking for the river to be dredged and cleaned out. We're not asking for miracles. We're not asking them to build the dam overnight, but that could be done within a week. They could say, yes, let's do it and get on with it. That's why I want pressure on NRW. And I don't disagree with bringing NRW to the meetings, but they're going to tell us the same old. I've sat with them 6-8 times now. Tim Marshall's a lovely guy. He knows his stuff inside out, but he's not going to give the go-ahead to clear that river. We need to go higher than him. Mike Evans, I can't remember Pam Gillard, I think it's, I can't remember his boss's name, but I'm just saying, so 12 foot into 5 foot doesn't go, but thanks anyhow. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Driscoll. Councillor Vince Bailey.
Yeah, sure. It was just a tiny thing, really. I mean, Miles was talking about the point I'd made about some houses building up a little bit of extra protection for themselves. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective of the impact it has further down. I was actually thinking that they've done stuff to protect their homes, and it's come over further upstream, and it comes down the side, and it renders it pointless. You know, that's why we need to be more concerted. I wasn't sort of indirectly attempting to criticize anyone. I suppose it works both ways, but it was, you know, there were some properties where they'd clearly made an effort to safeguard against it. But if the house to the left of you, which is upstream, hasn't done something similar, it comes over that wall there, comes down the side, and it gets in anyway. I mean, this is why it's so important to look at these measures, including the one that Vince just said about, you know, dredging that river properly in the long run.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Bailey. Right, I'm going to bring in Councillor Peter King now, who's a cabinet member, who's, I know, has had a lot of work around this as well. So Councillor King.
Thanks there, Chair. Thanks, colleagues. Just a couple of comments first, and that is the recommendation you make. I would draw your attention to paragraph 1.2 of the report before you tonight. And just because there's no one to advocate for all the other areas, I think if we're looking at increased gully cleaning, they would expect exactly the same, and I think that's part of the conundrum we face. The comment about road closures, I do have an idea of my own, and that is I would like to see some sort of electronic road signs fitted that could just be switched on and put up messages at appropriate moments, and that may be something that can go a little bit further forward. But I also have to express my dismay at the behaviour of some drivers. It seems to be that if you have a particularly large vehicle with 4x4 capacity and it's standing high on the road, you will drive through at, I will almost use the, I won't use it, but something approaching reckless speed and create an almighty bow wave because you're in a hurry to get to where you want to go. And I think there is an education issue about driving much more carefully if you are trying to push your way through a flood. So that's just a couple of comments for the committee to take on board. But I want to explain to the committee and to the members of the public present tonight that I really do understand the anguish and anxiety felt by all the victims of December the 23rd. Both my adult sons and I spent most of that afternoon attempting to bail out and mitigate the internal flooding of 2 homes of my own home. That said, I appreciate that my situation was entirely excessive rainfall, as it was the rising groundwater from within and consequently considerably cleaner than others suffered. But I would also encourage residents to explore the mitigating measures for their own homes, as I have. For me, floodgates aren't suitable, but I now have 2 electric pumps and hoses, but you'll understand me if I'm not looking forward to testing them. I think it's also important to say that my Cabinet colleagues and I have not yet made any judgments or decisions. And I would remind you that this is an initial report. We are still gathering evidence. Indeed, tonight's contributions will become part of that evidence. And it is for the specialist consultant to collate and consider all the evidence and come up with recommendations and report back to the Cabinet. All right, that said, the contents of this report and that section 19 to follow, however factual, they do not convey the misery such flooding causes, nor the ongoing anxiety felt by those affected. My heart goes out to all of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor King. And I think that the entire committee can echo those thoughts and stand with you with that. It is miserable. I still remember the 2007 floods and the length of time it took to even clear up, and it's as I said at the beginning of the meeting, it's still with people to this day, particularly those residents who were affected. So thank you for that. Right, Councillor Driscoll, I want to try and just bring the meeting, draw it together to some conclusion. Did you, was there something you wanted to add in?
Yes, I just wanted to actually thank Councillor King for his comments now and in previous meetings. The fact that he's experienced flooding more than most people in a lifetime does give a lot of comfort to the members of the public that were flooded, and I know, speaking to some, they do appreciate him coming on and giving his views, and thank Councillor King for that.
Okay, thank you, Vince, appreciate that. Well, we've had a really good discussion around such a dreadful event, and I think just compounded by the fact it was literally just before Christmas as well. It's not good at any time, flooding, but it does seem to make the misery even that much worse for people, and in the middle of a pandemic as well. So I would like to place on record our support and our thoughts that go into the residents and the ongoing issues and those worries that they're still, well, and cleaning up the actual physical mess. It's about your worries and your stress around that as well. And also not being able to provide a quick solution, because we can't provide a very quick solution. This has to be thought out. It has to be joined up. It can't be just one silo either, which is why I was a little bit disappointed when I heard that Welsh Water haven't attended those residents' meetings. I think that is slightly disappointing, and I'd like to put that on record as well. We've got a couple of proposals there. There's one that we write to NRW, and we ask them to attend this meeting, and we ask somebody quite high up, I think, as far as we can, to attend this meeting, because there's been issues with NRW for many years. I agree with you, Councillor Driscoll. They just don't seem to give you those answers, but I don't think it will hurt to actually ask them to attend this committee. They haven't been for quite some time, so I think it's long overdue anyway. And I think, you know, they've got to start taking responsibility for their part in all of this.
Absolutely.
And these ongoing issues. So I think that's the first proposal. And we have had a proposal there about gully emptying, about proposal for twice a year. So maybe we could just word that is ask for it to be reviewed with a suggestion of twice a year, because obviously it has an impact on everywhere. It's something that is under review, and it needs to be under review. We need to look smarter at how that actually takes place. But I think that's a good point to actually emphasise back to Cabinet. So are we happy with those proposals? Although, yes? Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we've had a very good discussion. Everybody's been able to air their concerns, which I think is only right. I'd like to thank our three speakers, Dr. Max Wallace and Mrs. Ruth Brennan and Mrs. Wendy Gilligan, for your input tonight. I think it's really useful, and I think it's very pertinent. So I'd like to thank you for coming along this evening, and those views will be put forward I know other cabinet members, this meeting is recorded, so we've actually got it there for evidence, physical evidence as well as written evidence. So I'd like to thank you for that input as well. So I'm going to bring the meeting to a close now. I have no other business. As I said, there was just this one item on the agenda tonight, very important item, and I'm glad we've been able to give the length of time just to that item. So I'd like to thank you all very much for attending, and have a good rest of the evening. So thank you all, and see you at the next meeting in March.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Miles, and everyone else.
Thank you all.